To record it. Oh. Mm. Okay, so we might begin. Welcome, everyone. There's 34 attendees. As far as I can see, the number seems to have stabilized. So you're very welcome to the monthly Hare's Corner Clinic, where we focus on different aspects of managing your land for nature. So my name is Pranjali, and I work with the Hare's Corner and Burren Bureau Trust, and I'm joined by our guest speaker, Jesmond Harding of Butterfly Conservation Ireland, and our colleague Brendan Dunford as well. So Jesmond is going to speak for maybe 20 to 30 minutes. I'm trying to make it shorter and shorter every time. And after which you're free to ask, put questions to him through the chat or the question and answer panel. So I will keep an eye on the questions and we'll put them to Jesmond after. So fire away, Jesmond.
Okay, good evening, everybody. And I'm going to start sharing the presentation now. So I hope everybody can see that. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the brief for tonight is how to manage your land for butterflies. And your land can be a field, a meadow, a corner of a field, a front garden, a back garden. You know, it can be any space. You will always attract butterflies to any outdoor space if you're doing the right things. And what I'm doing is the angle I'm taking tonight, there will be practical tips later on the presentation. But what I'm starting with tonight is the flowers for pollinators. And of course, butterflies aren't the only pollinators. There are moths, there are hoverflies and bees and flies and so on. So we have a scientific study for this. And this was published in 2022. A number of people from Trinity were involved. And the study was called Conserving Diversity in the Irish Plant Pollinator Network. So I thought that would be an interesting source of information for the best flowers for pollinators, because if you want to attract butterflies, you really do need flowers. So let's have a look at what this study found. A few definitions first. What's a pollinator? It's an animal that transfers pollen from plant to plant. This process helps plants to produce seed and fruit. A native flower is a flower that has evolved and occurs naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat. In other words, it wasn't brought here. It's not a Hebe that came from New Zealand. An ecosystem is a community of organisms and their physical environment interacting together. And a habitat is the natural home or environment of a plant, animal, or other organisms. And it provides organisms there that live there with the resources they need. So, what did this study do? This study it's an Irish study. Most of the studies are not from Ireland. They're from Canada, the United States, Britain, etc. But this is an Irish study. And it looked at flowers and pollinators in 4 main habitats. It looked at intensively managed areas, and maybe this could be your area. So it could be agricultural or developed land, coastal dunes, grasslands, including semi-natural and managed grassland, and woodlands and scrublands. And scrub really are just trees less than 5 meters in height. And the study looked at 3 flower visiting groups, butterflies, bees, and hoverflies, and it was conducted over those various years there. And you can see them there. The final year was 2018. Now, it looked at flower visitor interactions between 239 flowers and 148 insect visitor species in Ireland, and transect surveys were made for the study. Transects are fixed route walks carried out in suitable weather when conditions and species are recorded. And the composition they found, most of the pollinators were hoverflies. Most of the pollinators they found visiting flowers were hoverflies. 54.7% of them were hoverflies, 30.7% bees, and 14.6% were butterflies and moths. Bees dominated in abundance of flowers. 61% were of the visitors were bees, 35 hoverflies, and 4% butterfly and moth visits. So now bee populations are often very high, so especially common corridor bees. So that's probably not that unusual. However, they didn't monitor for night visits from moths. So I would think the 4% is too low. Um, so what did the study find? Intensively managed habitats had the highest plant species richness, but had the highest proportion of non-native plant species and the lowest species richness. The only habitat with more insect visitors than plant species was coastal dune systems. So they had more insects than plant species. Wood and scrub habitats had nearly twice as many plant as insect species because insects generally don't like shaded places. And grasslands, both semi-natural and managed, had the highest insect richness, but intensively managed habitats had low insect species richness. So intensively managed land might have had a small number of common species, but it didn't have a large number of species. Only 4 plants were found in all habitats. Those 4 are bramble, common ragwort, dandelion, and white clover. The non-native plant species represented 50%, half of the plant species richness on average across surveys, but they only received 11% of total visits. Now that's very significant, and I'll tell you why. If 50% of the plants aren't native, that's a very high proportion. So 50% were, 50% weren't. So they received 11% of total visits, but that was more a result of there being so many of them, of the non-native plants. It wasn't a result of the non-native plants being particularly good for pollinators. So what they did is they looked at the top 35 plants for Irish pollinators, and that list consists of 4 non-native flowers and 31 natives. So again, you're seeing the importance of native flowers. Although 4 non-native flowers were important, these made up 31.7% in the plant pollinator network. In other words, part of the importance of those non-native flowers was due to their abundance, not because of they had particularly good pollen or nectar resources. It was because they were so abundant. So, for example, one of those is fuchsia. So you know what fuchsia is like. The bush produces massive numbers of flowers. So it was because of the abundance, not because they were particularly useful for pollinators. So it's really important to get that message clear. Non-native flowers are not as good as native flowers for Irish insects. The importance of native plants to insects shows how important it is to protect semi-natural grassland habitats, which we are not doing correctly. So what are those best plants for supporting different insects? So this is one of their measures. So in other words, you might get an insect that will only visit 2 or 3 flowers, and you might get an insect which will visit almost any flower. But the best plants for supporting different insects, in other words, diversity, was red clover, creeping buttercup, tormental. Creeping buttercup is the one that sends the runners along the ground and kind of has it's quite common in Ireland. Tormental, which is kind of likes it likes slightly acidic soils. Common bird's foot trefoil, which likes alkaline soils, but it's not absent from acid soils, provided they're not too acidic. The common daisy, common knapweed, which is a brilliant plant for pollinators and butterflies in particular. Self-heal, Prunella vulgaris, ribwort plantain. And when you look at that plant, you think to yourself, does it really have butterflies on it and insects on it? It actually does if you watch carefully. It's not a conspicuous flower. Lesser hawkbit, which likes kind of sandy soils and often slightly acidic soils, and white clover. That's followed by field buttercup, common hogweed, which is a giant of a plant, dandelion, creeping thistle, bramble, spear thistle, marsh thistle, which is a wetland plant, rough hawkbit, which is a lovely flower, flowers from June till October, really. Beautiful flower, one of our kind of dandelion looking species, wild thyme, which has plenty of that in the burren, and autumn hawkbit, which is a kind of a smaller, daintier looking version of the rough hawkbit. So the again, for supporting different insects, the good plants, common ragwort, nipplewort, purple loosestrife, fuchsia, which is non-native, large flowered pink sorrel, which is not native, smooth hawksbeard, box, which is non-native, although it is native to parts of England, elder, Ground ivy, which is again an inconspicuous little blue flower, but it does support insects. I've seen orange tip and green veined white butterflies feeding on it this time of the year, and the humble primrose, which again for supporting different insects. Finally, you have corn marigold, perennial wall rocket. That's a near native. It is native to England. The cashew family, water frigwort, Scrophularia auriculata, which is a really inconspicuous little red flower. You'd hardly think it was a flower, but wasps particularly love it. A friend of mine, his way of encouraging wasps not to come into the house in late summer and early autumn was to have water figwort near the kitchen, and the wasps concentrated on that, and rough hawk's beard, which is probably introduced. Now, when I looked at the list, I was really surprised that Devil's Bit scabious wasn't in it. So I contacted the corresponding author about the plant, and she said it was pretty much middle ranked. So she said from the 221 species, it ranked 20th for abundance of insect visits, 47th for the number of pollinator species, 66 for centrality. I've actually forgotten what that is. 33rd for duration of bloom, 58 for visit rate, and 196 for functional complementarity. Functional complementarity means supporting different insects. And she told me, this is Laura Russo, she said no butterfly visit was recorded, which I found absolutely astonishing. And I immediately sent her about 6 or 7 different photographs showing her butterflies on it. So she was quite taken aback. And so it just shows, you do have to always have a healthy skepticism about studies. Now, plants with the highest number of butterfly species. So we looked at plants that support different insects. Now we have the ones with the highest number, and top from 1 to 10 down. The top plant was bramble. Now, I know a lot of people don't like it because it can get very untidy looking and scrambling. I have it in my garden, and I love to see a flower, and the berries as well. I've seen butterflies feed on berries. I've seen small copper, red admiral, and comma all on the berries of that plant of bramble. So it is very useful, both the bloom and the nectar. Creeping thistle, which a lot of people hate. Creeping thistle is clonal. You can see 50 or 100 plants. It's essentially one plant. So it's actually it's an interesting. In 2009, there was a big painted lady migration event to Britain and Ireland, and they in this part of the world they love laying their eggs on creeping thistle, and their larvae defoliated and killed lots of them. So the following year, farmers are coming out and found the creeping thistle was gone. No need for herbicide. The butterfly did the trick. Thyme, common bird's foot, spear thistle, common ragwort, creeping buttercup, kidney vetch, common knapweed, and white clover. So 1 to 10, they're the top for the number of butterfly species. So bramble, for example, the nectar is really accessible. Like butterflies have different sizes of proboscis, or the tongue. Like a tube, it's like a straw, it's a hollow tube. They dip it into the nectar and suck it up. Not all butterflies can reach nectar that are found in deeper plants. So, for example, the hedge brown, or gatekeeper, as people call it, that can't access nectar from some of the plants with deep corollas, so it can access bramble, it can access ragwort, but it can't access some of the flowers with where the nectaries are deep down. But bramble is accessible to all of our butterfly species. So here's bramble here, and this is a comma, and the comma is beginning to appear in the burren now. And this is one feeding on a ripe blackberry near my home in September. And they just gorge on blackberries. They love feeding on them, and they feed on the flowers as well. And there's the bramble flower there. So there's thyme. Again, that photograph was taken in the burn at Fahey North. Fabulous plant, really nectar rich. I've seen transparent burnet and common blue and dark green fritillary gorging on that nectar. The plant that supports the highest butterfly abundance is common bird's foot trefoil. Now the flower itself produces lots of blooms, so it's probably not surprising it supports the highest butterfly abundance. And there you can see a little moth on it, the narrow-bordered bee hawk moth, and you can see it's enjoying the nectar of that plant. So it's day flying moths that will use it too. Here's a spear thistle, and you can see a lovely brimstone. Brimstone has one of the longest proboscis, or feeding tube, of all of our butterflies. By the way, it's not that tube is, it's actually in two halves, and there are little catches attaching it. The butterfly can actually detach them, split the proboscis in half, and clean any pollen stuck in it with their feet and reattach it. So they can do a bit of maintenance on it. The plant that has really deep nectaries that gatekeeper can't reach is the teasel. They can't get to it. Brimstone can, and so can peacock. There's a small copper on common ragwort, and it's really fond of that plant. It's a beautiful butterfly. I saw 8 today in a field near me, and most of them are feeding on dandelion and red clover, actually. Now, this is a clip of ragwort just to show you how important ragwort is. So you can see how keenly visited it is. Lots of six-spot burnet moths on it, and meadow brown and common blue. So it's really, really, this is the coastal form. The coastal form has very short, small petals. You can barely see them. So it's a really, really important plant for pollinators. And I know it's toxic, and we all know that it is, but it's not toxic in this form because livestock don't eat green ragwort. And you can see the larvae on it too. They're the cinnabar moth caterpillars, the little black and yellow, the Kilkenny Jersey caterpillars. So ragwort, much maligned, is a really important plant for pollinators. So it should be spared, and it's a fabulous plant, and I grow it in my garden. So I'm going to move on. I think there are bees on it as well, but yeah, I can see the larvae anyway. Right, okay. So there's the common blue on common ragwort. So again, it's much sought after. You can see this is the coastal form. It doesn't have the petals. This is a different form. It is common ragwort, but the plant that grows on dunes is slightly different to the ones you find further inland. So, for example, in the Burren National Park, those are they have clearly they do have show the petals. On coastal dunes, they often don't. Creeping buttercup. It's one of the longest lasting blooms, as well as having really accessible nectar, and that's a small white on it. Um, and there's a field. This is the field actually where I saw the 8 small coppers today. And if you look, you see that reddish inflorescence there in the middle of the buttercups. That's actually the larval food plant of the small copper. That's the common sorrel, which the leaves are edible. You can use it in a salad. It has a kind of a peppery taste. Now, kidney vetch is another one of the best plants for butterflies. It's a calcareous specialist. It doesn't occur on neutral or acidic soils. And there is one of our endangered butterflies, the small blue, and she is laying eggs on that plant. If you look very closely at about 7 o'clock on the lower flower, you'll see a white speck. That's an egg from another butterfly. The larvae are cannibals, so they won't tolerate another caterpillar on the same flower. So females lay on one. They check the inflorescence before they lay on it. And there's a massive kidney vetch. This area has since, this was taken in Port Rand, Dublin. This area has since been destroyed by coastal erosion. Those dunes are gone. So these are one of the challenges faced by our native butterfly species, the rising sea levels. Common knapweed, and there's a little Misumena vatia crab spider waiting to assassinate a bee or butterfly or moth that lands on it. So predators will often station themselves where pollinators land. So that's what this one is doing. There's a buff-tailed bumblebee on common knapweed, and there is a brimstone on common knapweed. If I had to pick one flower only, it'd probably be this one. It'd probably be common knapweed. And of course, the goldfinches love the seed. It's a perennial. It's nearly impossible to kill. It's an incredible source for our native pollinators. White clover and green hair streak. And if you look above the green hair streak, you'll see another spider. It was on the buttercup, but it hopped onto that. The spider didn't see it because if it had it, it would have killed it. So there's the green hair streak, and it's actually feeding on white clover. Like a lot of our best butterfly plants are fairly common, humble plants. They're not they're not. For example, the beautiful bee orchid that supports almost no insects. Common knapweed supports 40 different species of insect, which either take nectar or feed on the plant. And the oxeye daisy supports 80. So not all native plants are equal either. Here's a peacock, and this peacock is on creeping thistle. And there he is there, feeding on it. And creeping thistle is a really widespread plant. Often grows where the soil has been disturbed and then left to settle. So say, for example, you have a field where the cattle are poaching a corner, you'll often get creeping thistle in that type of area. Now, and he's actually feeding up to get ready for the winter, this one. Now, I'm going to skip that one there. So, some notes of caution. Finding Devil's Biscabius was unvisited by butterflies is concerning. The study looked at the plant pollinator network now, but not at the importance of plants as food for the immature stages of insects. The role played by non-native flowers as food for insect larvae is likely to be much less important, highlighting the importance of native plants. Most of our native butterflies and moths do not feed on non-native plants. They just don't. So, for example, the cordylines, people plant them in their gardens, especially in coastal areas. They're useless. So something like grey willow. Grey willow supports 115 of our larger moths and probably hundreds of micro moths. So and not only do they feed on the leaves, grey willows flowers in early spring when not much else is in flower. So butterflies will visit grey willow. So you get peacocks, brimstone, comma, small tortoiseshell, and at night you'll have Hebrew character moths and herald moths feeding on the nectar. Non-native plants are important in the plant pollinator network. Some of their importance, their abundance, not the resource content. So, like fuchsia is one of those. It's important not because it has great resources, but because it can be so abundant where it occurs. And the study does not refer to other uses insects make of plants. For example, the orange-tip butterfly uses cow parsley flowers for concealment. The study does not reference the damage caused by some non-native flowers. So fuchsia has a high rank in the plant pollinator network, but the plant is an invasive alien and is replacing native vegetation in some parts of the West Farm from Donegal to Kerry and should be eradicated before it causes even greater damage. It has begun to make inroads on the Burren in the roads near Flanore and near Corkscrew Hill. Fuchsia has little value apart from feeding adult bees and hoverflies. So people are kind of smitten by it. Because it looks it's an undeniably attractive plant, but it's actually a menace for native. It just displaces native plants that are much more important than it for our native insects. And Crocosmia is another one. Montbretia is another baddie. That also, it's a thuggish plant that literally kicks out native vetches. By the way, members of the Fabaceae, the vetch family, the study found that they have a far greater importance than their numbers in the environment would suggest they have. They have a disproportionately high importance for pollinators, given how few of them there are in the landscape. So those vetches growing up against your hedgerows, they're very important. At the moment, bush vetch is in flower, kind of a purple flower. Butterflies and bees love that plant. Important native plants for butterflies and other visitors not mentioned already are cat's ear, Hypocurus radicata, and greater knapweed, with lots of it in the Burren, grey willow, hempagrimony, water mint, wild angelica, wild carrot, common ivy. And there are pyrrolizidine alkaloids contained in Asteraceae, daisy flowers. They're important. Now, pyrrolizidine alkaloids are contained in the nectar of members of the daisy family, like coltsfoot, for example. And butterflies make a number of uses of these alkaloids. They're toxic. They can cause liver failure and cancer. So they're poisonous. So butterflies absorb these and it makes them distasteful to birds. But not only that, the pyrrolizidine alkaloid compounds are used by male butterflies to manufacture pheromones that are used in mating. So butterflies aren't just getting sugar. They're not just getting a sugar shot from flowers. They're obtaining important chemicals used in reproduction. So some butterflies will visit certain flowers to obtain those chemicals. So it's important to have plants like colesfoot, like greater knapweed, like common knapweed, etc., members of the daisy family. And as I referred to earlier, my correspondent Laura Russo indicated Devil's Escapus didn't rank in the top 10 plant species by any of their measures, but was present in 55 transects, but not observed being used by butterflies. It is, in fact, it's one of the best butterfly plants, being visited frequently by a diversity of butterflies from August to October in gardens, limestone grassland, wet grassland, macro and dune habitats. Studies agree that pollinators are strongly attracted by specific plants and by high floral resources. Native plants attract a greater range of visitors. Areas where high densities of flowers occur will attract more visitors. Say you have a lovely big scabious plant in your garden and the flowers, and you might get 2 or 3 butterflies on it. If you had masses of them, you'd have dozens and dozens of butterflies. Butterflies are also influenced by the amount of the resource, not just the presence of the resource. So it's really important to provide as many flowers as you can. So there's the Devil's Scabious there. There's a small tortoiseshell. The seed from that came from either the Burn or Lullymore. I can't remember where. So
Here's
there he is.
Shell on Devil's Scabious, a native wildflower. Now this is an excellent flower because it flowers in August and September when a lot of our butterflies are preparing for hibernation or for migration or breeding. And it's a multi-flowering plant, so there's great value in the plant. It's a perennial. It's easy to grow. It will grow in well-drained or really wet waterlogged soils, so it is really unfussy. And it's a beautiful flower as well, and it will be used by bees, hoverflies, moths, a whole range of nectar-loving insects. And you can see this tortoiseshell is really getting great value out of this flower, and so should you. So cultivate this flower and make your wildlife garden special. And you can see I have plenty of it here. It's a really excellent flower and really easy to manage in any garden. It'll grow happily in a border as well.
So the more the better, and that's a Fahey North, and you can see the hawk bit and the eye bright, the little white flower, and also the blue of the Devil's Scabious. And again, Burren National Park, oxeye daisy, 80 species of insect depending on it on that plant for one part of the plant or from one part of the plant or another. Greater knapweed, Burren National Park again, really showy, lovely plant, calcareous grassland only, really, really beloved by pollinators. And again, Devil's Scabious at the Burren National Park. Look at that display. That's a magnet for species like droneflies and peacocks and tortoiseshells and brimstones and commas that are preparing to overwinter. Herald moths as well, they'll overwinter too. The tissue moth. These are all gorging on nectar to build up those fat reserves for the winter. Now, some top tips. So this is the big advice section here. Best butterfly gardens or habitats are warm, sheltered, sunlit, native flower-rich, grassy areas surrounded by a range of native scrub. That means trees less than 5 meters and trees found locally. Habitat mimics a woodland glade. In other words, if you have a grassy area surrounded by scrub and tall trees, but still with access to the sun, it's warm and sheltered, that's really the best type of habitat structure for butterflies. My garden is like that. It's surrounded, it has the house on one side and it has trees and shrub and hedges on the other 3 sides. So it's what you're doing is you're creating a heat trap with all these native flowers, which will grow beautifully in the warmth. But insects love warm, sheltered spaces. They really do. And if they get too warm, they can go into the body of the wood I've planted in my garden or the hedge to cool down, which they will do. So your different parts of the habitat are catering for different needs of the insects. Sow native flowers from local seed and sow them in abundance and sow them fresh. Don't be keeping them over winter, then sow them. Sow them fresh and don't throw them into the grass either. Bare soil is best, but if you can't do that, scrape with a really strong rake to expose soil and sow them in that. Add yellow rattle to reduce grass vigor. It's a hemiparasitic or semi-parasitic plant. It taps into the grass roots to obtain nutrients and it reduces the grass figure, so you don't get that dense grass growth that outcompetes flowers. Pond and wetland adds to a butterfly garden. Some key nectar and food plants are wetland species. So one of the key nectar plants that is a wetland species is purple loosestrife, for example, really ranked high among the measures in the Rousseau study. Butterflies will drink from a pond, and also butterflies will drink from wet, muddy patches seeking dissolved salts. When males mate with females, they lose mineral salts from the body that need to be replaced. So they drink from mineral salts dissolved in mud. I've often seen wood whites, cryptic wood whites. I've seen pearl bordered fritillary, and I have seen green vein whites drinking, and holly blue drinking from mud and male butterflies to seek those dissolved salts. During the mating process, the males transfer sperm, but they also transfer minerals to the female for the eggs to develop, so they need to replace those. Dry grassland area with bare ground and stones is great for heating the habitat and providing basking sites. So again, you're adding warmth because these are cold-blooded animals. They need external heat to become active and to remain active. Log piles and holly and ivy, which are evergreen, for overwintering and roosting. They're important. Leave part of a grassy area unmown from May to August, including those months. Leave some tall vegetation after August when you mow, and after mowing on the 4-inch setting. In other words, don't mow low down because you might remove the base of leaves. So, for example, you can remove the base of leaves of, say, common knapweed, it'll come back, but if you remove the base of leaves of oxeye daisy, it won't come back. So, and the same with scabies, so be careful. Scrape soil in some areas to assist germination of wildflower seed, like I said, with the rake. Remove cuttings. When you cut that meadow at the end of the season, at the end of August, remove them and cut a hedge or scrub in February, but in rotation. Do not cut all of it annually. If you do, species that lay their eggs on the scrub over winter, like the blue-bordered carpet moth or the brown hairstreak butterfly, their eggs will be removed because they tend to lay on the newest growth. So that's the growth that would be removed when you cut. So cut them in rotation. And if you have a hedge and more land and have a hedge, try and have a scalloped outline, because if it's a scalloped hedge, if it's a straight hedge, the conditions are uniform. Whereas if you have a scalloped hedge, you have little inlets that are warmer than others. So in very hot weather, they'll move to the outside of the hedge, outside of the scallop, so it's cooler. But in cooler conditions, they move to the inside where it's more sheltered. So that kind of structural diversity is really important as well. And there was a study published in 2012 which showed that hedges and an extended field margin alongside the hedge is crucial for movement of animals through the landscape, not just pollinators like bats as well, but also they have an incredible impact on maintaining butterfly and moth populations, even in an intensively farmed landscape. So that native hedge and the extended field margin, a couple of meters from the hedge, really important. If you could leave 3 meters, it'd be brilliant. Grow native plants from native local seed and no fertilizer, herbicide, or pesticide. So I'm leaving you here with a photograph of my little mini burn outside my back door. So you can see the pea gravel, you can see oxeye daisy, there's bird's foot trefoil, kidney vetch, and surely one of our favorites, the Geranium sanguineum, the bloody crane's bill. So, how are we doing?
Thank you, Jesmond. That was brilliant. You did stick to the time. That's fantastic.
Oh, good. I'm glad I did that. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good tips there and listing of the important points of what we can grow for butterflies. So any questions, please put them into the chat button or the Q&A, and I'll put them to Jesmond. So Jesmond, I just look at your last photograph there. How did you grow or
very easy.
the bloody crane's bill and
I'll tell you how that was done.
Yeah.
I cleared an area, so I'm working from bare ground, and then I put weed suppressor on it. You know, that kind of it's like, it's not plastic, but it looks plasticky. It kind of looks like an acrylic. It kind of looks like a material, but you lay it down. You can buy it at any garden center. It comes with a roll. I laid it down, and then I got my plants which are grown in pots. I cut with a scissors. I cut a little hole in the liner, put the plant in it, dug a hole underneath, put the plant in, and then I covered it all with pea gravel when I set my plants in. The plants were grown from seed, so I got the bloody cranesbill seed from Howth Head, because there's an area of Howth Head that has the bloody cranesbill. I also took seed from the burn, from scabious and bird's foot trefoil and other. I always took it from sources that I thought were as wild as they could possibly be, to maintain the integrity, because sometimes you get native plants that actually came from somewhere else. Like, for example, Oak Glen in Wicklow, the acorn, it's a native oak wood, but the acorns from that came from Germany. So I'd be very fussy about where I obtain my seed from, but it's best to obtain native seed from local sources and plant it fresh. Like, get it in September and October, whatever it is, whatever month you harvest it, and rake that soil, or rake the sward, cut the sward, rake it back hard, and literally just toss it onto it. Do not cover. Wildflower seeds don't dig a hole in the ground and bury themselves to grow. A lot of those seeds need light to germinate. They won't. If you cover them in soil, they won't germinate. So a lot of those seeds need light as well as water and warmth. So it's really important you don't rake soil over them. I think a lot of people do that, and a lot of people buy wildflower seed from shops which came from the Netherlands, which is not a good idea. They throw it in the lawn and it doesn't grow. It will never grow in a lawn. You must, if you have a lawn, you want wildflower seed, you must shave it, cut it very severely, rake it with a strong rake to expose soil, and then sow the seed into it. There's really kind of you can have the best of both worlds in some ways. Some people go for a spring meadow where they have lady smock and the dandelions and the germander speedwell and plants like that in it, and then they cut it at the end of May. But some people go for the summer meadow where they cut to the middle of May and then let their knapweed and their marjoram, etc., grow. So the common marjoram came from the burn as well. It's a wonderful plant, and it's a perennial, really easy to grow. Once it takes off, it's happy, and it kind of, sometimes you actually end up having to control it because it'll get anywhere. But and this stuff works. I mean, believe you me, native plants they're so, like, people, you see people with roses and they think, well, why aren't there butterflies on them? Well, they're not native, and they probably have no pollen or nectar either. Bees and butterflies know if the pollen the plant has nectar. So, for example, common bird's foot trefoil supports the highest abundance of butterflies of all native plants, but the nectar takes 24 hours to be replaced. So when a butterfly takes nectar from one of those blooms, it's not replaced for another 24 hours. So now it produces lots of blooms, and that's probably why it has so many butterflies visiting it. But another little tip, I didn't say it in the presentation. If there's a dry period, water your meadow, and I'll tell you why. Plants hold nectar back in dry weather. If you water flowers, it increases nectar release during dry periods. So it's a little tip to get the nectar flowing during very, very dry conditions. Butterflies need all the help they can get. At the moment, I'm compiling the new red list with National Parks and Wildlife Service and the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and the data coming back is very, very bad. And I'm talking about the most common widespread species are actually the ones in the biggest trouble. So never look askance at a green-veined white or a meadow brown. These are actually, our widespread butterflies are actually are showing the biggest declines. So they literally do need all the help we can give them. I think I saw a question there, Pranjali, did I?
Yeah, there's a question here, really interesting. Thank you. What do you think of crimson clover or phacelia for butterflies?
I'm not familiar with crimson clover or phacelia, but you get some plants like sedum, like ice plant, which will be festooned with butterflies. It isn't native, and it does have a place, but any plant that does attract butterflies isn't native. The crucial determining factor should be, is this invasive? If it is, don't grow it. So, for example, I wouldn't look askance at a plant like Argentinian vervain, which is Verbena bonariensis, because it's not invasive. It doesn't escape into the landscape like Montbretia and cause trouble. So plants like that can be planted judiciously in spots where you can keep an eye on them and make sure they don't get out of control. Some of the plants like that, any non-native plant, no matter how good it is for pollinators, if it's invasive, don't grow it, because we have loads of plants that are crowded out by those flowers. Like Montbretia crowds out, for example, tufted vetch, which is the food plant of the wood white butterfly in the burn. And it's actually I've seen it do that. So it's really important that you don't interrupt ecosystem functioning by bringing in plants that shouldn't be here.
Thank you, Jesmond. Brendan, did you have a question there?
I did, yeah. Thanks, Jesmond. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, full of information. I've a few little questions, and nice
Mhm.
short answers maybe. But Buddleia is one plant that you didn't mention, much beloved of butterfly lovers, but very invasive as well. So what's the take on Buddleia?
Yeah. Look, there's no point in saying it doesn't work for butterflies because it does. But if you actually look at it, you get about 7 or 8 species on it all the time. It's the same 7 or 8. It's actually 7 or 8 of the most colorful ones as well, which is why people love it. Buddleia can be a big disappointment for some people because sometimes you get Buddleias that flower in July in gardens, and there's not many garden visitors in July. So, for example, if you want butterflies to visit your garden, the Buddleia needs to flower in the second half of August and into September. The problem that Buddleia has is its leaves feed no native butterflies and about 2 native moths. And you might say, oh, well, 2 native moths, that's not bad, but we have 1,567 moth species. So to feed 2 of them is pathetic. Plus, those 2 feed on other things as well, so they don't need it. Buddleia can be really invasive. Another problem it has, and I've seen this, I watched the way blue tits are attracted to Buddleia in a quarry in Limerick when I was doing a study on the quarry. It concentrates butterflies to such an extent that the predators show up and it's like, being invited to dinner. So whereas if they're in a field where there's knapweed growing, birds like blue tits generally forage quite near to cover, quite near a hedge. They tend not to go out in the middle of a field to forage. They tend to forage near cover. So if you have a load of Buddleia bushes, blue tits and grey tits love that. They'll actually park themselves in it and pick the small tortoiseshells and peacocks off. That's what they do. So it's a little bit like a bird table for butterflies. You concentrate their numbers to such an extent that they're easy prey. So that's another problem I'd have. Plus the invasive nature of it. I'd be terrified if that plant ever got into the burn because the burn looks ideal for it. So that's
Yeah.
a really big reason not to grow that plant.
Okay, so the verdict is no to Buddleia.
I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't touch it. You have to look at it in the round. Just because something attracts butterflies doesn't mean you should grow it.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Second
Yes, I
question.
remember you calling it a pub. It was like the pub for the
It's
butterfly.
like a pub, yeah. It's like a pub. They get drunk on it, and in fact, because those inflorescences are packed together in a long kind of a tube shape, the butterfly can spend a long time on it, which makes them easier to get. Whereas in something like knapweed, it spends a few seconds on it and flies off to another one. Like there's movement. It's the
Yeah.
butterflies moving around the place. Whereas on this thing, they're literally drunk on it, and you might get 4 or 5 on the same one. So it's a blue tit is likely to be able to get whatever. And wrens especially, wrens love butterflies. I really do. They pick them off. I've even had wrens flying into my moth trap, like flying into the trap to get moths. So they really do. It's just too convenient for them.
Okay. So the other question I had was with regard to meadow management, Jesmond. So
Mm.
I love the way you described the fact that diversity of species and also of habitats. So from the scrub to the woodland to the grassland and even to the bare rocks for warmth. But
Mhm.
if you have a nice wildflower meadow, are there any management tips? Like I've noticed myself here that I kind of mow one line through
Yeah.
the meadow, and it seems to attract a lot of damselflies, dragonflies, sometimes butterflies for the sheltered effect. But
Yeah.
secondly, then, just following on to finish that question, so typically then a meadow is taken for hay at the end of maybe July, August type. Is
Mhm.
that destructive then when all the habitat disappears at once? Or is there alternatives to
Oh, yeah.
reducing the impact?
There's your first question about mowing an area. If you have a range of sward heights in a meadow, you're going to attract a greater diversity of species. So when you mow an area through a meadow, what you're doing is you're actually creating a range of temperatures. So, for example, you will often get meadow browns, and instead of laying right in the tall grass, they will actually lay where at the very edge of the mown area where it abuts onto the tall grass. I've actually watched them doing it because it's warmer and the larvae will develop and the eggs will hatch quicker and the larvae will develop quicker because they're in a warm spot. So it's a bit like having tall vegetation around a large area of rock. So when you have that heat effect with food plants adjoining a rock, butterflies often lay on those edge habitats. A lot of our butterflies are edge breeders. They lay on the edges of things. So where a tuft of grass spills over onto a bare track, say worn by a tractor, you'll often get species breeding just on the edge. So because for temperature reasons, it's warmer. So mowing a path through it's not just nice to allow for access, it's actually good for insects as well. In relation to removing all of the material in, say, in August when you're cutting the meadow, if it's a lowland hay meadow type habitat, I always think it's a really good idea to leave patches, because I find that in spring, when I leave patches, the first place I see, say, ladybirds waking up or shield bugs, it's where I left the long patches. And most of our butterflies overwinter in the caterpillar stage. And if you have bare shelter patches that provide shelter, if you have taller vegetation, provides shelter for them to overwinter in. Because, for example, the ringlet butterfly, it overwinters at the base of a dense tussock of, say, moorgrass or cocksfoot. So those bare, and again, do that in rotation. Next year, cut that bit, cut last year's bit that you didn't cut, and leave another bit unmown. So have a few patches that you don't cut, rather than a uniform treatment.
Right. Last couple of questions, then maybe hand over to Pranjali again. Two things. First, I have the questions around grasses. We talked a lot about herb species, but what significance do diversity of grass species have for butterflies? And secondly, you talked about the comma, which is starting to come in. Are there plantings which will kind of, given the fact that this is coming to Ireland now, will it use native species, or are there particular species that it will seek out? And likewise, you might just mention moths as well. Is moths the same? Yeah, thank you.
We have a number of butterflies that breed on grasses. So we have species like specklewood, wall brown, meadow brown, ringlet, gatekeeper, grayling, small heath. These are all grass breeders. Most of those species like unfertilized grasslands. The only one I've seen that really survives longer term in a field where fertilizer has been applied is the meadow brown. The others disappear. Some of them immediately, like small heath, just can't tolerate fertilized grassland. Neither can wall brown. They just can't. The level of nitrate in being taken up by the grass exceeds their toxicity tolerance. So it's a really bad idea to fertilize. And if you look at the Chagas fertilizer rates advice, it's way above the physiological tolerance of those butterfly larvae, and way above it. In some cases, for example, the small coppers food plant, the common and sheep sorrel, it actually, those applications would kill those plants anyway, even if it didn't poison the larvae. So grasses are very, very important. There's different ecological needs. So, for example, the ringlet likes grasses that are and specklewood like grasses that are on damp and humid places and slightly shaded, whereas small heath likes grasses that are big tufts of dead, untidy looking fescue grasses where there's lots of dead senescent material. Same with the grayling, actually. It likes a lot of dead material in grasses. When you fertilize grassland, the grass gets healthier, it gets greener, it lowers the temperature just above the soil, and the larvae die of cold because the enzymes in their body can't digest the food because the temperature is too low. So it's really important. Like, temperature is very important, and the management system you apply is very important, because you can have all the grasses there, but if they're very, very green and there's no leaf litter, dry, dead leaf litter in them, the larvae can't develop because it's too cold. So it's really important for those places to be unfertilized. The comma, it's a natural spread. It breeds. I've seen it breeding on 2 plants in Ireland: common nettle and wych elm. And wych elm isn't too common in the Burren, but common nettle is reasonably common where there's heavier and more fertile soils. And fertile soils have their place. There's natural fertility in some soils, especially along riverbanks, for example, where there's a bit of alluvial soil flooding in the winter. It loves Comma is kind of a woodland glade, woodland edge species, and scrub species. So it loves those edge habitats. It'll breed on nettles growing up against a hedge quite a lot, and nettles in a damp, mucky. Those damp, mucky places where you get, say, plants like flag iris and kingcups. Those nettle-rich places, like in Dromore Wood, for example, along the Fergus there. That's the type of place Commas like. They really like that. And sometimes you see an old abandoned cottage with a big, massive nettle patch where probably all the food and refuse was thrown out, and they're thriving on that kind of nitrogen sink, that nitrogen boost. So you'll get Commas breeding on those types of places as well. But it has been seen in the Burren. And I would say there's no stopping its spread. It's spread over most of the country at this point. So it's a lovely treat to look forward to. I saw a question about honeysuckle a moment ago.
Yeah, there's a question there. Does honeysuckle or dog roses, do they support butterflies?
Honeysuckle is the food plant for the early grey moth, and the species like the beautiful elephant hawk moth, and I think probably the swallow-tailed moth, I think they take nectar from it in the evening. So it is important. What was the other plant?
Dog roses.
Dog rose. I have seen butterflies on it. They're not avid feeders on it, but dog rose does feed. The dog rose leaves do feed some moth species. So it is an important native plant to have. But the honeysuckle seems to produce a lot of nectar. It seems to be a plant that has developed for pollinators that fly in the evening. Although I've seen the large white butterfly taking nectar from it during the day. But you need a long proboscis to get the nectar.
Right.
The nectar's quite deep down. But I've seen large white butterflies actually feeding on it. So some species are opportunistic feeders and will feed on anything.
Yeah. There's a question there, but I think you covered it. Importance of grass for breeding of brown butterflies.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that the more diversity of structure in your meadows and in the garden in general, and of course, no fertilizers are the two big.
Yeah, and if you have a meadow in your garden, don't have the meadow in all of the garden. Have some short areas, because if you have short areas, you'll have plants like white and red clover. Yeah. And they'll be covered in honeybees and common carder bees. Like some flowers only really thrive in shorter swards. So it's important to have some diversity of structure in the sward as well.
Yeah.
That does assist. And plus species like common birdsfoot trefoil, it tends to like shorter turf as well. So a diversity of sward heights will help. And in that regard, cattle grazing is very important, because cattle are selective grazers. They'll concentrate on a patch here and then leave another patch untouched and concentrate another patch. So you get this patchwork of sward heights, where sheep are a bit of a disaster. They're non-selective. In other words, they graze everything. And you get a uniform sward height that is not good for insects at all. It really isn't. And it's quite cool as well, because there's no shelter. So the structure, the shelter and warmth provided by structural diversity is really important, as well as the choice of plant species. And also, don't try and force something to grow where it doesn't belong. So, for example, I tried greater knapweed in my garden. It just won't grow. It's not alkaline enough. Like, there are some plants that won't grow in certain soils. So I gave up on that. It just, and I didn't do anything wrong. It's just not suitable for it. So forcing things to do what they're not going to do won't help either. But I find that the woodland glade, as I said before, grassland surrounded by sheltering trees and scrub with lots of wildflowers really, really draws big numbers. It really does. It's a one way. It really does work. and it's really important to provide shelter. Without it, insects are cold-blooded. A butterfly needs its body temperature to be about 36 Celsius to operate. The enzymes in a caterpillar's body to digest food the body temperature has to be about the temperature of a healthy human, 36 Celsius. Without that, they can't digest the food. And a butterfly caterpillar can die of hunger on its own food because it's too cool. So temperature is really important. It's a really important element of any habitat creation.
And what's the range, Jesmond? How far will they go to look for food normally?
Some caterpillars are extremely sedentary. They'll move a couple of inches in their lifetime.
And what about the butterflies?
Depends on the species. We have 35 butterfly species. About 18 of them are general countryside butterflies that will move. And some of them are nomadic, and some of them are even migrants. The rest are pretty stay-at-home butterflies. So, for example, a marsh trilby might move 50 meters in its lifetime, if even that. So some of them are really, really stay, and some moths are the same. You'll trap them by the same stand of hazel every year. If you move the trap 3 feet away, you won't get them. So they can be really, really sedentary. The most sedentary of our butterflies, the one that moves least, is probably marsh artillery. Although some individuals do wander, you'll occasionally get females that will move and found a new colony by moving somewhere else. But generally, they often they hatch in the same flower-rich area and they die there. They tend not to move, but some individuals will. If they didn't, no site that lost its colony would ever be repopulated. So there is always some movement. But some species, like for example, there was a study done a few years ago where they looked at isotopes of hydrogen in H2O in water. And by analyzing the hydrogen isotopes in the wings of the painted lady, they realized that some painted ladies from Europe, because isotopes of hydrogen are different in Europe to those in sub-Saharan Africa, they actually discovered that painted ladies from Northern Europe were flying across Europe in autumn migration, across the Mediterranean, across North Africa, across the Sahara, and were settling in the Sahel region where they're mingling with antelope and lions. That's thousands and thousands of miles of a journey. And that was because the painted ladies that were born in the Sahel had different hydrogen isotopes than those that originated in Europe. That's how they knew where they came from. So some butterflies will migrate thousands of miles.
Wow.
So they really are. And in fact, weirdly, we have a group of moths called the tussock moths. The migratory stage in those groups are the caterpillars. And they migrate by floating off on tiny threads and float up to the outer atmosphere. And it can be a transcontinental migration. And when the wind drops, they fall where they fall. So that's how they get around.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
That's how they do it. And it's just as well because we have tussock moth females that have no wings. So the females hatch from their cocoon. The males fly to them. They mate with the females. The females lay eggs and drop dead. Sometimes they lay eggs in their cocoon. They don't move. So then you say to yourself, well, how come that moth is all over Ireland then? It's all over Ireland. The dispersive stage is the adult female. So It's the caterpillars that migrate.
Okay. Thank you, Jesmond. I think we're running out of time. So I'll just put the last question to you from Sean Gallagher. Our land is on a hillside and mostly bog. Are there flowers well suited to that? We have tormentil, thistle, buttercup, but not devil's bit scabious or others.
Devil's bit scabious will grow on a bog if it's not too acidic. You could try and introduce a little bit. It might just not have got there. You could try a little bit of seed in September, Sean. Is it Sean, is it?
Yeah.
Sean, try a bit of seed in September. Scrape a little bit of the peat back in a drier area of the bog and see if it takes. It might. Devil's bit scabious will grow on some bogs. If they're strongly acidic, it won't. It will tolerate mildly acidic, neutral, and alkaline soils, But if it's strong, I've never seen them growing on really acid soils on bogs. You probably have enough flowers there, like say, for example, cross-leaved heath, that supports the green hair streak. And green hair streak butterflies take nectar on it and they lay their eggs on it. So don't try and force the habitat to be something it's not. Green hair streak is flying now. Go out and have a look for it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesmond. That's brilliant.
Okay.
Lots
No
of thank
problem.
you from everyone, and yeah, really appreciate that. Lots of useful tips. And our next month's clinic is going to be about managing invasives. So I hope you will join us for that
Good topic.
in June. Yes, yeah. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jesmond.
Bye.
No, thanks a million.